Fandom Portals podcast, where curiosity meets community in a celebration of all things geek. We build connections on every episode by delving into your favorite fandom questions in the time it takes you to bake a loaf of bread. I'm your host, Aaron Davies, and today we are here to talk about the Season 2 of House of the Dragon. I'm not alone today. I am joined by a very good friend of the podcast. It is Frank from the Geek Freaks Network. How are you going today, Frank?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to talk about House of the Dragon.
So am I. But before we get into that, Frank, can you tell our amazing listeners of the Fandom Portals podcast what the Geek Freak Networks is and what you do on that amazing space of yours on the internet?
So yeah, we also celebrate fandoms. We let everybody find their niche and enjoy it. We have the Geek Freaks podcast, where it's a rotating panel of hosts that talk about different things going on each week, and then a bunch of podcasts behind that too that each niche down into their own things. There's pretty much something for everybody. And then, yeah, we're just always posting stuff on social media. Too often, I'll say. Yeah.
No, your social media posts are absolutely slick. So if you guys haven't already, go and check out the Geek Freaks on Instagram, especially, but they're pretty much available on all social medias. Is that correct, Frank?
That's correct, yeah. But I would say our better foot is on Threads and Instagram for sure.
Yeah, same here. Threads is a great place to connect, and I think it's got some really great potential for everybody to connect on there. So definitely go and check them out on Threads. Those will be in the links below, guys, in the show description. But without any further ado, let's kick off our discussion today, because I am a person who I wouldn't actually call myself a Game of Thrones House of the Dragon fan. I wasn't a person who read the books initially, and I definitely had my indoctrination into the story mythos from the TV show. How about yourself, Frank? How did you get into the land of Westeros?
So I was looking for something good to read, and the first season came out, and I hadn't watched it yet. But I came across the first book. I was like, oh, you know what? Because I like to be able to have that comparison with the live action stuff. So then I picked up the first book, got super into it, then watched the first season, and then I just read it, everything. I read all that there was to read about it, and got so into it. And yeah, so I am definitely into it now, and I'm often on the forums, complaining or chatting or comparing or whatever.
Definitely an active member of the fandom of the Westeros space. That's really good. So did you read the books prior to the seasons coming out then? Because you obviously picked up the books, there was more written than the seasons had been produced then. So then from there you were able to compare as you went. Yeah.
Yeah, the first one came out before I started reading it, but then I hadn't watched it yet. And then everything else I read before even watching it at all. So before it came out.
And when we're talking about House of the Dragon specifically, what literature are we talking about from George R.R. Martin? Because he does have a breadth of stuff to read. Thick ass books, you might say. So what ones are we talking about when we're doing House of the Dragon?
It's a really interesting choice, because it's a book called Fire and Blood, and it's a textbook. It is kind of like how the Silmarillion is in a lot of ways. It is spanning 300 years of Targaryen history. And so House of the Dragon, I always say 60s, probably around 100 pages of House of the Dragon in that section in the middle there. So yeah, it's reads like a textbook. It goes a lot faster than like the Ice and Fire. But there are, of course, everything that's there is usually referenced in Game of Thrones. So you have some of it from that too.
Very cool. So when we're talking about like it reads like a textbook, are we talking like so it goes through the ages and tells you who the kings were and stuff like that? Does it feature some of the similar characters from the show as well when we're talking about the novel material?
It definitely does. So when I say it reads like a textbook, I mean a textbook in those times. So what it is, the Maester, which is like a priest at the time, right? He is writing down the accounts of everything that happened to the Targaryens from witnesses of the time. So especially at this time, there are two. It's a Maester and a jester of the court. His name's Mushroom. And so what I like is you have differing opinions on different things, and usually the scandalous things are done by Mushroom. He's like, oh yeah, and then he took Rhaenyra down to the house and started kissing her and stuff. And then the Maester's like, they had a formal meeting and it was nothing the same. And so as you're watching the show, very unique to any other, normally you're like, oh, the book's better. Well, in this situation, the book is being told on second account. So there are things that are spun to make the church look better, maybe, or whatever, or the family better in general. But the show is telling you what actually happened. So like, for just a quick example, Rhaenyra and Alicent's relationship is still kind of not that bad. Like we see in season 2, they meet up twice. But in the books, of course, those meetings are all in secret, right? We don't see them. Nobody knows that Rhaenyra went over there. So in the books, it's just they hate each other right off the bat. Now, the victor tells a story. So a lot of times one side's painted worse than the other because, the victor is the one that tells the story.
That's cool. It kind of gives the space for that unreliable narrator.
Big part of it, yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
when you're looking at the books and looking at the actual TV show, there would be a lot of differences because, as we said, that unreliable narrator, it's coming from two different sources, two different backgrounds. And I like the way that George would have picked those vastly different backgrounds to get those two different perspectives as well. We're going to get into some page to screen differences a little bit later, but before we do, let's give your overall thoughts on season 2 of House of the Dragon. What did you think of the season as a whole, Frank?
I think it was a wonderful season, visually stunning. The character growth was so important this season. It was something that we really needed as we transitioned into the rest of the story. I think it's foundational for the Targaryens as a whole because we have a spinoff coming up that's going to feature them, and of course we have Game of Thrones. I'm not blind to it, guys. It had a terrible ending. Boy, it was so disappointing that we didn't get to the battles that they were teasing this whole time. Like, we saw this ship being built from episode 1, and then at the end of the season, it's like, yep, ship's ready to go. It's like, no, show us the ship fight. Yeah, it was good, but we needed 2 more episodes, I think.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think, it feels like they had a 10-episode plan and then for whatever reason they stopped at 8 because, the last episode for me wasn't a bad episode of House of the Dragon. Was it a finale? Probably not. I agree with you in terms of I would love to have seen more in terms of just give us a little bit of bite for all the chewing that we've been doing all season. Not to say that the chewing had been arduous, because as a person who really loves character drama and seeing the growth of all these different characters, that's like the meat and potatoes for me, but I definitely like it peppered with different scenes of action. Have a chat to me about the visual. That was a weird way to say that. The visual spectacle that is House of the Dragon, the special effects. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm such a big fan of their set design. Of course, the dragons are always cool, right? And House of the Dragon, a lot of their budget has to go to that more so than even Game of Thrones. But I think it's important to note that like they built a lot of the Red Keep. The sewers that we saw, like they actually built all those sewers. It's running water going through there. The way the castles look, Harrenhal, this is the best look at Harrenhal we've ever had. And Dragonstone, they do a really good job of it, just like it not just looking like a castle, but you knowing from the walls that that's Harrenhal, that's Dragonstone, that's Red Keep. Like you recognize these places. And I think that's just the costumes too, like every little detail in the costumes, the armor, where that guy was born, who he fights for, everything like that based off their armor design. That's just really good attention to detail.
And I think having George R.R. Martin on the production team helps with that as well, getting his vision across. Let's go off book a little bit and talk about some of the locations featured in season 2 of House of the Dragon, because as you said, we do have a very good look at Harrenhal. Very weird place, Frank, very weird place. What can you tell us about Harrenhal that we may not have gathered from the seasons of House of the Dragon so far? So for people who haven't read the book, what could you tell us about Harrenhal?
Harrenhal is in the center of Westeros. That and like kind of the twins, that big bridge that we see, like those are 2 choke points. And it's a very interesting place because it's like main setting for the book that nobody has control over. It's very odd in that way. Basically, the idea is Harren the Black, this one dude before the Targaryens really were in charge, thought he was amazing. Aegon the Conqueror comes over and says, "Hey, you got to bend the knee." Everybody else says, "I'm now in charge." And now we learn from this, he has a reason for that. Harren's like, "No, I've got the biggest castle ever to exist." So he takes Velaryon the Black Dread, which is bigger than Vhagar, I want to note that, and blows fire down into it and literally melts the castle. That's how much he burns that castle down. So that castle's never been rebuilt since then. When Harren was building that castle, he chopped down the weirwood trees, those white trees that you see the Starks worship, and we saw a lot in this too, where Daemon was at. And so the bed that Daemon is sleeping in, a lot of the walls are made with this weirwood, and it's magical wood. Essentially, it's cursed. And the island that's in that little lake next to them is the place where the green men take care of weirwood trees. So it's like super magical place that is super sacred to a certain people, and they just like, let's chop everything down and build this castle that's cursed from day one. So that's why it's one of the more magical places in Westeros.
That's a really good summary, and a lot of things I didn't know before, like the stuff about the dragon coming in, obviously, like really central part of Westeros and somewhere that everybody wants to control. It was mentioned a few times by lots of different fractions. You mentioned the weirwood trees. Now, during the season finale of this, Daemon was able to touch one of those trees during one of his visions with the help of Alice Rivers. Is that something that commonly happens to people, or was that a Daemon-specific event, like in terms of the magic and the visions and the space of the Targaryens in the, like, vision finding? What can you tell us about that?
So where would they are connected, right? Like, so it's funny is why he's touching that. I'm surprised they didn't show it, but Bran is seeing him because Bran is very connected to that. So is the Three-Eyed Raven, which is I'm sure going to be another spinoff someday. But yeah, they're all connected. Everything's connected, so they see throughout all of time and space, including into the future. Now, Daemon's magic is different than that magic, but like kind of intermixed. Like we saw Helena kind of also whispering to him, which is like a different kind of magic, really. But the Targaryens, they are like X-Men. In fact, that a lot of them are born with different abilities. Like Helena has the ability to see the future to a degree. Daenerys is fireproof, and so there is some untapped stuff there. Like the fact that they can control dragons is a magical thing. It's not actually just by luck or by the way they're taught. It's a blood magic. So when he's doing that, there is probably some untapped Targaryen magic, and then of course the weird tree itself is magic. And so he's just kind of seeing what the destiny of it. And what I love about that scene, it's actually one of my favorite scenes, is the entire time he thought Viserys was full of it. Oh, why are you care? Well, Viserys knew about the Song of Ice and Fire, and then after that, he believes him, and then sees that Viserys saw that Rhaenyra was the best choice for this mission that we have to do, and was then like fully loyal, which is really cool to see Daemon finally get to that point.
And that's a good segue onto what we're going to move on next, which is the character growth throughout this season. Now, all of our beloved characters started this season in a particular place, mentally, physically, or whatever, and then at the end of the season, we could say that they are vastly different in terms of the way that they have grown or changed. Now, let's start with Daemon. Starting the season, can you talk about how he grew over the season and what was probably one of the most significant changes for him as a character as the season went on?
I would say, first off, his story is the one that I get the most complaints from. People are saying, oh, we took too long of him just dreaming. I joke around about that as well. But he has the most growth, in my opinion. He started off the season thinking he should have been king. He's with Rhaenyra because honestly, he thinks it's his best chance at the throne. And he's just Daemon. Then through the process of sleeping on that weird bed and having those dreams and realizing that the Song of Ice and Fire is real, and also dealing with the River Lords, seeing that he's not really meant to be an actual leader of men because he doesn't do good. He just brings a dragon and scares one side. So I think he has a real gut check on like, you can't be king, and also there's more important people in charge, and then sees that his best thing is to be a conqueror. There's a saying with the Targaryens that when a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin, and you're either a great leader or a great conqueror. And I think he sees that, okay, I'm a conqueror, not a leader.
That's a really cool little insight. With Daemon's journey as well, I remember a quote from Alice Rivers, the character. She said, "You came to Harrenhal with a clenched fist." Now, to me, that was very interesting because obviously that's like a violent sort of action. And that was very much significant towards his approach with the Rivermen when he'd gone in, because mid-season we saw that part where he was on a Caraxes, his dragon, and he was literally threatening the Rivermen. And for the first time in a long time, I think he was very confronted because they turned away and walked away from him on his dragon in his threatening approach. And then it's that almost that slapstick scene where he's just sort of sitting on the rock and his guys behind him, and he's just like, I did not expect them to do that. And then I think that's where the wheels start to turn for Daemon. And can you have a little bit of a chat to us about Alice Rivers and her relationship with Daemon? Because I think she's very significant in his change, even if it's just as like a voice or a sounding board. What's the significance between Alice Rivers and Daemon, especially like putting in any book lore, if there's any surrounding that?
Alice Rivers is a fascinating character, and if you liked her, she's coming back, guys. So don't worry about that. But she's actually, there's a lot of speculation of how old she is. I think she's about 200 years old right now, and that at the point of the show. She's the wet nurse to like the old man that was there. Like she's been the wet nurse the entire time, for a long time. And so that's one thing that's kind of toyed with. And she's trying to shape the future. She's also, from my understanding, trying to have a Targaryen baby. So there's a little bit of that going on too. And so if it's not Daemon, it'll be somebody else. But yeah, I think she's just kind of showing him because one of the big themes for all of House of the Dragon is the fact that the wealthy are fighting and the people below them are dying. And the fact that he comes to Harrenhal and be like, oh, I'm going to do this. It's like, yeah, but the River Lords are going to fight and die because of whatever you just say next. And you have to see that it's so much bigger than you. There's a bigger purpose. And so I think she's as connected to the weird tree as he was towards the end, and probably saw the destiny that's coming ahead. Rivers, so she was born in that area. There is definitely a connection to the green men there, the children of the forest.
Very cool. So yeah, just for our audience as well, doing obviously spoilers of season 2. We are going to spoil some book stuff, but we're not going to go ahead and spoil things from beyond what the show has talked about. So we will give insights and things like that. Frank has a good knowledge of the book, but we're not going to spoil that for you guys. So let's move on to the antithesis or the opposing character of Daemon, you might say. On the other side, on the green side, we're talking, of course, of Aemond Targaryen. Very interesting character. We see him at the start of the season. Obviously, he reminds me of what Daemon was like in the first season, where he is very much vying for what his brother has. And then he shows moments of vulnerability throughout the show where we see him obviously in like cradling up to, I've forgotten the character's name, but she's essentially one of the women of the night. Yeah, and then he's obviously humiliated by his brother, and then he goes through a transition as well. Can you talk to me about the way that Aemon sort of deals with his shame and embarrassment, and how that has enabled him to be the sort of tyrannical figure that he is throughout season 2?
Aemon is one of those guys you just love to hate. And so Aemon is very much a mirror to Daemon. And we see like in season 1, when he gets his eye sliced, he's being bullied by the other kids and stuff like that. He's just that kind of guy. He got tortured as a kid. And as Daemon is becoming more and more accepting of the Targaryen life and his role and his part in the world, Aemon is going the opposite direction. He started off as like very loyalist to the Team Green. I'm part of the family. I am the sword to my brother, and very, very strong within his family. And then as the season goes on, and he starts to take power for himself, seeing that his brother is bullying him just like anybody else, that like even Team Green is not strong, and that he needs to be by himself. He starts to alienate himself, and he even alienates Helena, somebody who he had a bit of a crush on when he was a kid. And his mom, he's got so many mommy issues, and he's starting to alienate her too, or he fully alienates her. So now by the end, he's like by himself. He's on the biggest dragon, who even the dragon doesn't quite listen to 100%, which that's because Vhagar is just tired. Let's be honest. So we're seeing by the end of the season, he is by himself, a terrible king, again, a conqueror, not a leader, while Daemon has gone closer to Team Black and less isolated. Aemon has gone the opposite direction, is more isolated and furthering himself away from his own family.
He's definitely one of the linchpins in the Greens faction in terms of their strength and their ability to manipulate the battlefield. Obviously, Vhagar being this omnipresent aspect. One of the best things that I thought of season 2 was and I don't know if you felt the same way, but every single time that Vhagar sort of made an appearance on the screen, it reminded me of those old sort of movies where like the big monster was approaching and you heard it before you saw it, and it was slowly revealed through, and there was always that bassy kind of music. The battle reminiscent of when the dragons fought and when Vhagar was there as well and fighting Meleys. That one specifically, because you actually see Vhagar sort of bobbing under the tree line like a massive shark, and it was really cool. And every time that hulking dragon takes off, it almost fills me with like fear. I'm just like, holy crap, like this thing is huge. Yeah. So definitely a really big part of the like the Greens army and faction. We're going to get a little bit into like dragon seeding and dragon claiming a little bit later, but does the book reveal anything about the relationship between Vhagar and Aemond in terms of why that partnership sort of happens? Vhagar to me seems like a very old sort of soul and obviously a very wise dragon, and Aemond seems very reactionary and driven by his feelings. So it seems like an unlikely pairing to me. Did you want to comment to that?
So Vhagar's previous, just before this one, was Lena, and that was Daemon's first wife, right? So she's a very kind soul, very nice person. But Vhagar's original writer was Visenya, which is, we're going to see, there's a spinoff coming up about Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sister wives, and one of them was Visenya, and she was a warrior, one of the best warriors in history. She's oftentimes referenced back, and her mount was Vhagar. So we're going to see Vhagar, a much more spry and fast dragon in that spinoff. Still super large, but faster, right? Because every time Vhagar moves, I love how like all the other dragons, you see them like fluid and moving around quick. For her, for some reason, it feels like you could see every part of her body move independently as it's kind of like gets its lumbering self in the air. So we're gonna see her young. But so I think Aemon has a personality just like Visenya, her first writer. And I think there was something there where she's mourning the death of her last master with Lena. She was the one that killed her, but Lena asked for that. And then so when she sees Aemon come up, this like tortured little kid, but with a fire in him that reminds her of Visenya, she's like, yeah, this is what I need. I need a like cleanse my palate with some, good stuff, and sees it in him and knows that she can go back to war with him. I think that's one of the things is he doesn't listen to her when Aemon doesn't or I'm sorry, Vhagar doesn't listen to Aemon because she's kind of doing what Visenya would have done, where she's just like, go burn down Dragonstone, get rid of all those dragons. You could do it. And so that's what I love, is she's still acting like her oldest master.
It kind of reminds me of, and a very like immature sort of reference, but like Ash and Charizard when they have that sort of relationship.
Yeah, great reference.
Yeah, and Charizard is just like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. But yeah, I love seeing like Vhagar's attitude, and you can tell sometimes when you're watching the show where she's just this old, pissed off lady that just wants to just do her thing, and that's great. I love seeing that too. I definitely think we have more to see in terms of Aemond and Vhagar, especially given the fact that that is the chip on the chessboard that the Blacks need to move off in order to secure their position. And as the season went on, the Greens' position and Vhagar's importance just increased and increased, and we'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of power, when we're talking about some of the characters, there were characters that started with power and ended without any. So in particular, let's have a look at Alicent. When she sort of started the season, she was on the small council for the king. She had a very high and prestigious position amongst the council. And as the season went on, that changed. Can you talk about the change that Alicent went through the season specifically, Frank?
Alicent's a fun character because she starts this whole process off thinking, first off, she's fully right that Viserys wanted Aegon to be the leader, seeing herself as like, I'm taught by Otto Hightower, one of the smarter strategic players on the field. And as the days go on, like everything she thought was going to be a given is exactly what she's fighting against. Like she thinks that she's going to be able to hold on to power. It's like, we're fighting against a woman who's in power. We're not going to have you be in power. That doesn't look good for us. And so when there's an opening because of Aegon's injury, she thinks she's going to take charge. Like Aemon's like, and not even just Aemon, the entire council's like, no, we can't have you there because then it gives legitimacy to Rhaenyra, and we can't do that. So it's like she set herself up to never have a chance at actually winning this because she is Rhaena, but just on the different side of the chessboard. So it's a shame for her, and she loses power. And there is that thing where like she's friends and like her nephews are dying in this war. So it's not only just her kids, but also family that she grew up with her friend's kid. So I think there's a lot of complex motions there. I really like the fact that they brought these two characters together a couple of times to share that. And I'm glad that we're going to get Otto Hightower back in the third season because I think he's a really big part of empowering her again.
I agree. I think that Otto Hightower's presence definitely emboldens the Hightower name. He did just sort of ghost at the end of the season. We might get into a little bit about that in a moment. But in terms of her sort of downward spiral, you might say, on the power hierarchy, during that moment where Aemond was named, she was also denounced by, or not denounced fully, but publicly at least, by Kristen Cole. He is obviously a character that is emboldened by her, but he's also a character that is pretty disliked through the fandom as I've seen. Can you comment on why that might be, and also comment on some of the things in the book that Kristen Cole does that might be different or the same to how he's portrayed in the season?
One thing about Kristen Cole is in the history of House of the Dragon, like the history of the Dance of the Dragons, which this is called, he's to blame. So they actually like write it to where Kristen Cole's the one that did everything wrong because, you don't want to say it's a Targaryen. They're still in charge. So you say like Kristen Cole talked this guy into it. Whatever. He's the reason that Rook's Rest went so bad, but it's really just he's a pawn and everything else. The reason I think he's so hated is because like as bad as Aemon is, Aemon has like a right to the throne, or he has a right to be in this fight. Kristen Cole's just in there as an opportunist. In the show, not so much in the books, he's from Dorne. He works with the Baratheons. Then he gets his way over to, like, he's just trying to climb that political ladder so hard that it's like, dude, get out of here. You don't belong here. And in comparison, Larys Clubfoot, who I think is kind of doing the same thing like a Littlefinger type character, right? Doing the same thing, but adds value to them. Like they're the Lords of Whispers and stuff like that. When Kristen Cole's like, you're making all the wrong moves. You're just lucky and you're just sleeping with the right people. He's like the worst guy you work with, Yep.
Yeah, he's doing his way to claw his way to the top. And I like that whenever he's in a situation where people are talking about him, there is always a character that references his heritage, like his Dornish heritage, in sort of a bad way. Can you explain to people why that might be something that someone's not proud of, being from Dorne?
The Dornish people are so freaking cool, and Game of Thrones did them so dirty, the series. The Dornish people are the Martells are the leading family. They're all the way to the south. They look different than the rest of Westeros. They're a little bit darker skinned. The way it's described in the books is kind of a mix of like Spain and Egypt. It's kind of a mix of those two. There's a lot of like oasis-based things. They are incredible family. A lot of sand snake stuff, like a lot of really cool stuff like that. So when Aegon conquered all of Westeros, he didn't conquer all of Westeros. He couldn't conquer the Martells, and they actually took out one of his sisters. And so then he took 2 years to burn every city he can find in Dorne. So there's like this big revenge against the Targaryens and the Martells. There's a rebellion that happened right before this, and he's kind of a traitor to his people, Kristen Cole, because he left that. So they're just the other people. And then there's some, classic racism. Of course, there's always got to be some of that in every story. And it's a shame, but this is based off of real history here. And so he is a darker skinned character than everybody around him generally. The show doesn't show it so much, but if he's from Dorne, then yeah, he has kind of that brown, if you think of like Egyptian and Spanish skin,
Yeah, very cool. Now, talking about Dornish people from the sand, let's move all the way over to the people of Salt and Sea. We're talking, of course, of Corlys and his seafaring people. Now, can you talk about Corlys in terms of his growth through the season and what may have been one of the triggering events to his largest change?
Oh God, I love him so much.
He's the best. He's so cool.
He is the best. And guys, he's just a straight up pirate. Like the reason, just a real fast little quick history on him. His house wasn't rich before. I mean, yeah, they're Valyrian blood, but like not a rich family. He builds this ship, the Sea Snake. He goes across on, I think it's called the Seven Voyages, and he like goes to like untouched lands. Like people from Westeros never goes to Asai or whatever. And he does all his trading and bartering, comes back with a ship full of gold, and just made his family one of the richest families in Westeros. He makes his fortune. And that's why he thinks the way he does going forward. Is like he's like, my family's number one, and I make my family number one. So in the start of the season, when he's kind of like not super attached to the Targaryens, because the Targaryens didn't make their, especially not this level of Targaryens, didn't make their fortune. And really it was one person with a dream that got them to where they're at anyways. He's not super attached to them, doesn't have super loyalty to them, but he obviously loves Rhaenys more than anything in the world. The growth, I was a little disappointed with his growth because his two bastard sons, Adam and Alan, are very cool characters to explore in their own rights. And the fact that he just doesn't completely accept them, although Rhaenys is like telling him to, is a shame, because I think that they're important for his house going forward, and it would have been really nice for him to try to teach them or something like that. I don't know. Yeah,
it's like a sort of squire or mentorship. I actually really liked that scene in the end where he does talk to Alan on the dockside, and he basically says to him, now I matter to you because all of your heirs sort of have gone. And he has the same sort of emboldening steadfastness as I feel like his father has, because he's standing in his position saying, I know my worth, I will build my own, I don't need anything from you, which I think is good. And then Adam as a character as well, very quick to bend the knee to Rhaenyra as he becomes a dragon rider. He claims a dragon later on. And I think that family has a whole lot of power. And in terms of Corlys, he was to me, and obviously as you've said as well, he's a very ambitious character. And after the death of Rhaenys, he even names his ship like after her, which I think, what was it called? The
Queen That Never Was.
That's right, the Queen That Never Was. Yeah. So yeah, he's even sort of dedicated the rest of his mission life and his ambitiousness. He sort of funneled it toward that thing he realizes that he's lost in terms of his love. What a sacrifice too, Let's talk about Rhaenys. She deserves her day in the sun. So mid-season episode, probably one of the better episodes in the season, I would say, in terms of action. Can you talk about the moving parts that sort of led to that scene and the gravity of Rhaenys' sacrifice in that scene?
Rhaenys is a wonderful character. She really is the queen that never was, and the whole thing with her and Viserys, who would be the next leader, the fact that she wasn't chosen because she has the better right to the throne in the first place. She wasn't chosen because she's a woman. So then to see her backing up Rhaenyra, and it's like, yes, this is a second chance of just showing that has value, and she throws all her muscle behind it. And even, they believe losing their son and their daughter to the cause, like they're just trying everything. And she is a loyal Targaryen. She knows Jaehaerys. She knows the kings of old and stuff like that. So she's very much Targaryen. And I think her relationship with her dragon is the best example of what that relationship's like, because like even just to kind of throw in some book stuff here, before the actual war kicks off and there's just some tension between the two families that are still living in Red Keep together, their dragons would snap at each other. It's because the dragons are emotionally connected to their riders. And so when we see like she's like, all right, old girl, let's go out again or whatever, and then when they kind of look at each other like knowing that they're probably not going to survive this fight, but they turn back to continue the attack. There, that bond I think is important to see, because oftentimes we see the Vhagar thing that comes up a lot. The fact that Vhagar's not listening to Aemon, and it shows how out of character that is, because that's not normal. Normally, the dragon is bonded to you, and like Vhagar burning Laena showed like this bond, like I need to go out like a Targaryen, and Vhagar mournfully doing that, and we see that here with Rhaenys. She's the most pure Targaryen we've seen on the series, in my opinion.
And I loved her. The first time I remember looking at her and thinking that is a badass character was obviously in the first season when she broke through and flew off with Meleys to join Rhaenyra during the middle part of that season. Just a really sort of strong female character that people can get behind, and her sacrifice throughout this season really was impactful to obviously Corlys and spurred his transition, but to the whole sort of a black faction as well. Talking about Rhaenyra, she obviously goes through her struggles through this season as well, in terms of the fact that she is a woman. She's surrounded by all of these advisors who are all men, and they're all talking about how she should best claim the throne that belongs to her. Can you have a little chat about Rhaenyra and the sort of prophecy that leads her to be one of the greatest rulers in Westeros, but also her struggles with basically being listened to by the council that she's surrounded by?
One of the themes of all of Game of Thrones universe is gender politics and the fact that women are overlooked. A lot of like Game of Thrones specifically, or Ice and Fire, is pulled from the War of the Roses from England history. And a lot of times, like, if you guys just listen to the queens, we'd be fine. And so Rhaenyra being the one that's correct in the room is important, because not only are the men almost talking about her while she's standing next to them, they all just want to go to war. And a lot of those guys, like the Celtigars and stuff like that, they're such weak houses that you're not going to war, you're using my dragons. And the allies that are actually important aren't even at the table. That's the Aerys, the people who have the Vale, and the Starks up in the north. They're not even at the table. Those are the only two that actually matter. And so to sit there and try to talk over her is just foolish. And yeah, she's trying to avoid the war at all costs. It's her decisions, and to a point, Jace helps a lot too, to bring in bastards and to embrace the idea that there are bastards out there. That gives her any leverage in this fight. And then when she listens to a woman who says, you need to feed the people of King's Landing to show them you're good, is again the only thing that gives her advantage. It's never listening to the jerks around that table that are just like, oh, we should go to war. Like, that's not what's going to win you this fight.
Yeah, wave the sword never works. You mentioned Jace and the bastards in this. I think a very massive theme of Game of Thrones and even House of the Dragon is the importance and the value of those that seem to have no value. So especially in this season, the bastards, the cripples, and the small folk really get their day in the sun. Let's talk about Larys Clubfoot first. You said he's positioning himself in a very advantageous spot in terms of his friendship, I'll say in quotes, with Aegon. Can you talk a little bit about his motivations, his house, and some of the theories surrounding him? It may be outlined in the book, but I think he has a hand in what's happened to sort of Otto Hightower. So can you explain that a little bit as well?
If you want a real fun theory, there are theories that he's actually a skin changer, so he could actually he's like actually the cats in the castle. So that's some fun theories and stuff like that. That's how he gets his whispers, is that he actually walks around as a cat and listens to people, or the rats and stuff.
That is a cool theory.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he's like Tyrion Lannister if he's evil, right? Because Tyrion also was born different than everybody else, then was put down by everybody else. But Tyrion still was able to hold some dignity in that. And Larys doesn't. He makes sure to kill his own family to make sure that he's in a good spot. He doesn't care about Harrenhal. He owns Harrenhal, but he doesn't care about it. And he's seeing Aegon. The Aegon situation is complicated because I do think there is a level of like seeing another broken man and wanting to help out. Empathy, but also Aegon is so malleable. You could use him in any way you want to. So it's also a way for him to secure his own safety. And they escape at the end of the night, but Larys can't leave King's Landing for too long, guys. He's going to be back for sure, but just because that's where he's strongest. He doesn't do good in some random other place. He's good there where all the politics are at. So he's going to try his best to get back to it. And a lot like we saw with Game of Thrones, this will come down to a fight between whispers. Not come down to it, but a big fight is the White Worm versus Larys Clubfoot, like these two masters of whispers in this like spycraft. It's another layer to the entire Game of Thrones universe that's one of my favorites. And so he's going to do everything he can to make sure that he's safe and successful at the end of the day.
And I liked what he said in the last episode about how he thinks that the best course of action, and he urged Aegon to do this, was to let your enemies fight it out and then come back and deal with the scraps after that. You know, when they've all tired themselves out after battling this way and that, and they've defeated all the dragons that are coming this way and that way, and all together come back in a stronger position and then take what you want after that.
A key touch to that, he makes sure to kind of mention, like, you'll come back in and King's Landing will see you as a hero. Because we saw it in this season, we'll see it in future seasons, that while the Targaryens are fighting, there's people that are dying in the streets. And so if you come back and try to be a savior, like we saw with Rhaenyra trying to do with those boats, you're going to get the people on your side, and they are also a very important faction. If you guys remember in Game of Thrones, there was that little that moment where he wasn't a maester, but he's basically kind of like this evangelized preacher that was in the middle of the street that kind of was starting to build his own faction amongst Game of Thrones, Flea Bottom and stuff. That's a common theme. Like, people will forget about the actual people, and they will sway the war if you're not paying attention to them. So.
Very cool, yeah. Moving toward the bastards sort of angle. Now, obviously, we had Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. In this one, we have Jace, who is a very strong bastard. But then also, a lot of the small folk throughout this season are then corralled by Rhaenyra in this strategy to find more dragon riders. It's been widely mentioned that a lot of various different Targaryen kings obviously took other lovers during the time, so the bloodline exists in other... I'm interested to know how the book, especially from the perspective of the maesters, handled this sort of situation in terms of... Because I would imagine that acknowledging a bastard in this sort of regard, especially to the extent of giving them one of the noblest of birthrights for the Targaryen, would sit with the common people. So can you comment a little bit about that and how bastards are represented through the book, and especially from the perspective of the maester?
One of the most important characters of all of this is Jaehaerys the Wise, which we saw in the very first episode. He's the old man that made Viserys king. So his wife, before then, if you were a Targaryen bastard and you had the white hair and stuff like that, you were treated as like a specialty person, and they would oftentimes give you an important role. Like, even if you were just like in charge of the bank of this certain town or whatever, like, you were elevated immediately because you had Targaryen blood. You were seen as part magical. But that created a lot of problems where men would want to cheat to get a white kid, a white-haired kid. So Jaehaerys' wife said, we're going to get away with that system. And so after that, the bastards were like kind of not recognized, just so that it wouldn't make it more wanting to cheat on your wife and stuff, and making the normal quote-unquote wives okay. But during Jaehaerys' reign, he had a ton of kids, and they had a ton of kids. So there's like a lot of Targaryens legitimately born, and then of course they have a lot of kids that are not legitimately born when you have that many running around King's Landing. So particularly at this time, there are a lot of bastards of Targaryen kids, because there was like a long reign of peace, and when there's long reign of peace, everybody's just getting around.
Everybody's in love.
So, and that is a big theme. There's actually, I'm sure it's going to be a spinoff soon called the Blackfire Rebellion, which is about one king that just really liked his bastards. So he legitimized them all before he died, and then he died. And it's like, wait, you just legitimized like 12 kids or whatever it was. So you just made a bunch of heirs to the throne, and then they have a big fight for it. And so it's really impactful for Game of Thrones. Like the mercenaries you see in Game of Thrones, some of them are Blackfire survivors and stuff. So it is a theme that you'll see a lot in the future of the story.
All right, I think this is a good transition to move into the art of dragon seeding and dragon claiming. So I'm interested to know what the law says about those able to claim a dragon, because we see some very different claimings in this season, which I want to go through as well.
Yeah, the idea is that, okay, so first off, when they're born, they usually put a dragon egg inside their crib, and then that'll be their dragon. It'll hatch, and it'll be easy. So Rhaena, her dragon never hatched. She doesn't have a dragon. That's why Daemon, everybody kind of treats her as like, oh, you'll just go and watch the kids. She's not. That's why she's so desperate to find Sheep Stealer and possibly either die by it or tame it. There are other ways to claim a dragon. You can claim somebody else's dragon after their rider has passed. So that leaves the question like, oh wait, so Sea Smoke was able to be claimed by Adam. Does that mean that Laenor died off screen? We didn't see him. In the book, it said that he's just dead. It doesn't say that there's this like whole thing where he got away in the night. So it's believed that he's already dead. And yeah, and the original way that they were able to tame dragons is that there was this blood magic thing in High Valyria where they were able to kind of like manipulate things. A lot of people believe they actually kind of created dragons out of these worms that were in the area. So they are magical in a very real sense. Even the flames of a dragon are magic. Like that's how they make Valyrian steel, is with the flame of a dragon. We said that can kill the Night King and stuff.
Yep.
So the bonding with them is not so much just like you found a new puppy. It's that you have a blood bond with that creature.
Yeah. It seems like a really sort of special process in terms of who a dragon, and it does seem like who the dragon chooses when they're going through. Obviously, the Red Sowing in episode 7 of this season, you see 40 or so Targaryen bastards in the Red Keep, and 2 dragons willing to be claimed. One of them obviously being the bronze.
Vermithor.
Thank you.
Vermithor, the Bronze Fury.
Yep. A very fearsome dragon, and Silverwing as well was the second one that was there. 3 very different characters got dragons this season in terms of the small folk. Let's have a look first at Hugh, which I believe is called Hugh the Hammer. Is that correct?
Hugh Hammer, yeah. And
Hugh
it's
Hammer?
Ulf the White.
Yep, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great character. The fact that he, like, when he's not poor, he feels like he would be a Targaryen any other day of the week. Like, he's very strong, very broad. He feels like he's from the Maegor, the Aegon line, the stronger versions of the Targaryens. And the fact that he was poor was the only reason he wasn't, like, in that line. The show states that he is he's from a daughter of Jaehaerys. There's so many names. A daughter of Jaehaerys, and so we would be similar to the brothers or like the nephews or whatever of Daemon and Viserys. So he's like really close to that line, more close I think than the other bastards are.
Yep. And that is completely juxtaposed with Ulf, who starts as almost like a tavern hero, a drunkard almost, claiming and boasting throughout the different places of his heritage, only to have it legitimized by the fact that Silverwing does in fact choose him. What would compel a dragon to pair or bond with someone like Ulf in terms of... And I feel like his story is yet to be told, but initially from what I'm seeing, he was a drunken idiot, the dragon paired with him, and then from there he changed immediately into this, I'll say, asshole. Like, he was basically like...
Yeah.
Telling everybody about his new position of power, not being humble about it at all. So I feel like that pairing between Ulf and Hugh is really good. But what would lead a dragon to pair with someone like Ulf, Frank?
Well, it's all about your previous owners, right? So Vermithor's previous owner was Jaehaerys the Wise, like the old man. And so he had a master for a very long time and was mostly used to intimidate people. That's the most, like, he wasn't much of a fighter. He was mostly there to just intimidate people. And from day one, Vermithor, the reason he's called the Bronze Fury is he was kind of a jerk. Like, that dragon was a bit of a jerk. He was like, only I should be around that dragon. You know, there's a famous thing with horses. Some horses are just jerk horses, so only one rider really rides them. The other side of that is Jaehaerys' wife. And I keep saying just Jaehaerys' wife because I think her name was like Alice or Alicent. It's not something like that. Can't remember. But she was kind-hearted, wonderful woman. Her and Jaehaerys would have fights sometimes, but they were madly in love. And so Silverwing is kind of also impersonating her in a way where she was compassionate. She famously went on this big tour where she just wanted to listen to the women of Westeros and stuff like that. So Silverwing, I think, has always been kind of like love first and kind of a beautifully. So the way it reacts to Ulf, or Ulf the White, as kind of like a puppy, I love that. I love that, like the little shaking of the body. As for Ulf, I think that was just a kind of an unfortunate characterization that he was so jovial in the taverns. It's more important to look at it as he was trying to get free drinks by telling tall tales.
That's
and
fair.
That was his goal. Not so much that he was just like also just everybody's friend, but he's also the swindler that was getting everybody to buy his drinks because he was like a bastard. Going forward, that's the way you need to look at him. When he's like being super arrogant at the end, it's a guy who swindled all day long every day, and now he has all the gold, so now he's just going to act like his swindling worked. So he's not a good guy, but he's not like necessarily a bad guy. No Targaryen is a good guy, if we're being honest.
I feel like Silverwing in this moment sort of looked at him and went, I can change him. And then when he's sitting at the table with his feet up and he sees Jace for the first time and he goes, you and I are cut from the same cloth. I thought that was a really powerful scene because, you know, that was Jace's fear the whole time. He's just like, the only thing that legitimizes me is the fact that, you know, I have a dragon and now all these bastards have dragons too. And then somebody actually says it to his face and it was like, it had to be Ulf that did it too. And him at that dinner scene is just complete. A person who has definitely embraced his new position in a very jovial way, you might say. So I'm interested to see.
And Kristen to Hugh, who recognizes the strength and power that comes with that dragon, and sees that like you just got elevated, not just because you're now with a full belly and gold in your pocket, but also now you're a higher status, so you need to start acting like it.
Yeah.
And remember when he was talking to his wife, he's like, "You'll become a lady." It's because he knows that everything about him is about to be dragged up to the top if he can. And so Hugh is smarter about that situation. Like, no, act like a king. You need to be acting like that.
Yeah. I like that this season allowed us to see a few more characters, and I feel like that they were built really, really well. With Adam as well, his claiming of sea smoke, obviously, you said before, indicates that the previous owner of sea smoke had died off screen. He's very loyal, very, very sort of ambitious in terms of not raising his status, but doing his part, being worthy. It says, at the start, if he had the chance that Alan had, he would jump at it. And I think that was a pairing that made sense to me because I saw, that valuable trait in Adam. So it was interesting to me to see a dragon pair with Ulf, because throughout the whole season, I was like, what is going on with this guy? Why are we seeing this? Because I didn't know he was going to be a dragon rider, and some other people wouldn't either. So he's a very interesting, compelling character. I can't wait to see more of. Very cool.
Adam is going to be everybody's favorite character. I just love Adam so much. I'm such a big Adam fan, and the fact that he is so loyal, and it's like him and Alan are both ambitious, but like Alan's like, I will make my own way up, and then Adam's like, I will push a cause up. So it's like they both have two different ways of like being very important to the story or the history around them, but they go different ways about it. And just, man, I am a big fan of Adam and Sea Smoke, so it's just cool to see that. Like, all right, finally.
I think, in my opinion, Corlys has the best family. Like his characters and the characters that surround him, that house is probably my favorite in terms of this season of House of the Dragon.
Yeah, you really got to read the prequel that I wish they would actually just make it a prequel, like him on the ship, like dealing with pirates and forging new trade routes and stuff like that. Like he's straight up like this explorer that made himself one of the richest guys in the world instead of just being inherited like the Lannisters did.
Westeros' first self-made man.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. All right, we've talked about differences between the book and the screen quite a little bit throughout, but I will ask you, Frank, what are some of the major differences, besides the relationship, obviously, between Alicent and Rhaenyra, because we've gone through that one, but what are some of the major differences from the book and the screen that you can tell us about without giving too much away on what's to come?
The most important thing, so in the book especially, they go pretty quick with this. Again, it's like a history book. So when you're learning about the history, I was about to use United States history, but that might not work in this situation. When you're learning about World War II, you know about the facts of World War II. But then if you were to actually talk about like, this general, he was missing his kid at home, stuff like that, it makes the rest of everything sound so much better. In Fire and Blood, the book that this is based off of, is very factual, and like this is what we know and stuff like that. And like there's a little bit of added stuff here. In the show, we're giving context for everything. So the fact that Daemon becomes loyal and they end up doing this soon big move that's going to be coming in season 3, we know now that it's not because we know why Daemon made that move. Daemon is now fully on board with Rhaenyra, which we learned through the show. The fact that Aemond is such a bastard and I don't mean that in Game of Thrones terms, I mean he's just a jerk, is because he was picked on and he was kind of forced to be in that situation. Like it just gives so much context. Going back to that Alicent and Rhaenyra relationship, like that whole thing is just so black and white in the book, and here it's so much more tragic because they are friends and they are trying to save everybody, and that's what makes this series. And I think a lot of other shows can take, or movies or whatever that's based off of books can use this, is not just like being compared to the book, but also enhancing your source material with additional information, which I think makes this very unique and special.
Yeah, I think that was the word I was going to go with. It enhances the drama and the dots on the page that George R.R. Martin put down there. So just fleshing out the various different people that you're reading about through the historical annals. And I feel like the show does it really, really well, because even though some characters are really good or some characters are really deceitful or some characters are less than admirable, I like them all. And I want to see what happens to them all, And I think that is really artfully done by the shows, filling in those gaps. And, in some cases, sometimes that's good, just getting the outline of the story and letting the show creators do what they do, create the characters, create the emotional investment. Whereas in a book like Game of Thrones, I feel like everybody sort of had some preconceived idea of what had to happen and how people had to be. And then we've spoken about it before, Frank, about how expectation doesn't meet reality. And that's where fans and fandoms have the most sort of contention, I've found. So the fact that this is just like a history book and facts on the page, and the House of the Dragon show enhances what is there already, I think that's the best thing that could have happened with this series. Was there any more sort of book to text connection, book to screen text connections that you wanted to talk about specifically?
Sure, but to touch on what you said, which is such a great point. Like, so the first Ice and Fire book came out in '96. That's actual Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin will put so much. He'll spend half a page explaining the wine that Tyrion's drinking, and it helps because now you know about the wine. You're like, oh, okay, it's from Dorne. You got whatever. But he wrote with a co-writer Fire and Blood after the shows already started coming out. So like that book is clearly written knowing that we're going to need some spinoffs. So that I think is why like now you guys can't get too mad because I didn't give a lot of detail on what happened in that. That's up for whoever the showrunner is. So it was like he kind of knew. Remember that George R.R. Martin was a screenwriter before he was a novelist. He worked on an old Beauty and the Beast series, and I think Twilight Zone. He worked on Twilight Zone. So that's actually his background. But yeah, going on to some of the differences that we see from the show and the books, I think one of the biggest things is Helena. Her visions are given a lot more credence in the show, which I think is good because she is very special. One of the Targaryen dreamers. That's amazing. The dreaming thing as a whole, it's never explained that Aegon has dreams in the past. The Ice and Fire story, the Cat's Paw dagger, all of that is kind of just really short and explained, and we don't know that the Targaryens are handing that down. Why would we? The story is being told by maesters, not by Targaryen kings. When it's something that's only being told from king to king, that's why only they know about it. And that dagger is in Game of Thrones. It's the one that's used to attempt to kill Bran. And we know that if you burn the dagger, it actually reveals the Ice and Fire poem. And I like that they're giving so much more context to a dagger that has been a real mystery box in Game of Thrones, but kind of a light one. It's something that we would discuss a lot on the forums back in the day, but now is actually like, holy cow. When Aemond walks up to his brother burnt on the ground and we see him picking up that dagger, we're like, good. Okay, the dagger's with him now. Like people are tracking that dagger because we know at some point it's going to be given from Littlefinger to Joffrey to the Cat's Paw to try to stab Bran, and then that will start that event too. So it's just so funny that they give so much context.
It's a really good through line too, because obviously this being a prequel, you can see that through line in the same sort of universe too. It's a really great plot device, but also like a really relevant one too. Yeah, I love the way that they done the stuff with the dagger as well. In terms of the fact that this is a very sort of prescribed text reading, I've read in places that this has probably got 4 seasons worth of material. What are your comments towards that? How much sort of can we look forward to in terms of what's to come without revealing too much, obviously?
I thought we were going to go 3 seasons. When they were first airing it or first planning it was going to be 3 seasons, so I thought we were still sticking with that. And I was like, okay, well, that last season is going to be really action packed. With 2 more seasons, it'll be faster than the first season. It'll be faster than the second season too. Like you'll get more battles in it. And yeah, because we have some really pivotal twists and turns coming up. There's one moment, and there's one moment that's going to be like the defining moment of the Dance of the Dragons. It's what's referenced in all the other books that's going to happen. I hope they save it for one of the final episodes because they really need to. But it'll be pretty quick. And then I want you guys to remember, when you look forward to this too, George R.R. Martin has a really big tendency of taking characters like Jaime Lannister that you hate and making him somebody you love, and somebody you love, and like Daenerys, and seeing them in a different light. So kind of remember that characters are going to shift over the entire thing. So maybe Kristen Cole's a good example because guess what? He's not going to change. But Kristen Cole, imagine if Kristen Cole now sees the light and sees the damage he's done, and now is like trying to stop the dragons from killing people. That's the kind of thing that you can expect from House of the Dragons as well. So every one of these characters is still on the board for you to love or hate them.
That's fantastic because, as you know, I'm a really big connoisseur of characters, you might say, and their arcs. I feel like that actually drives story. And sometimes you can watch a character drama without there being much plot. But luckily, House of the Dragon has both. So we're in that kettle of fish here. But we digress. We've talked so much about this, Frank. We're going to move into our segment, which I like to call Season Celebrations. And with Season Celebrations, this is where my guest and I talk about the things that were great during the season, and we give awards to some of our favorite parts given some specific categories. So the first category for this award, Frank, is going to go to an award I like to call Scene of the Season. Now, this award goes to a particular scene that really stood out to you or was game-changing or made you react the most. So what is your Scene of the Season for Season 2, House of the Dragon, Frank?
I feel like so basic for picking this, but it has to be picked, is the big battle at Ravensbrook. I think that was a promise that was made from the very start, that you're going to see Targaryens fighting each other. It's like, okay, dragon fight. So we actually saw it on screen, and we saw how dragons are so different and the riders are so different. It's not just like, oh, they're on a dragon, they win. No, there is actual consequences. I think this was finally answering that desire the fans have had for so long.
I think it also legitimizes the fact that, having a dragon is a really powerful thing, because you can have the biggest army in the world, which you saw at Rook's Rest, but as soon as the dragons came in, it was like they just fired them out. You can have the biggest land army, it does not matter. So dragons matter, which really emboldens the fact that Rhaenyra actually went and made this drastic move to let bastards be dragon size, basically. So yeah, I really like that battle too. Really big spectacle, and it was a good fight too. I will give it that. My scene of the season for me goes to the scene in which we see Daemon bending the knee. So
yes,
yeah, at Harrenhal, when you see him moving through the crowd, now we as an audience know obviously that he has come to some sort of epiphany, but as he's walking through the crowd, you can see Rhaenyra's viewing the fact that he has this army. She's in a very vulnerable position. For her, she must have been feeling absolute fear, but he comes, after speculating the whole time, where does his loyalty lie? It was just a really great moment of transition, which I think builds upon the fact that there were so many vision sequences, you might say, for Daemon in Harrenhal, because I feel like if that transition happened too quickly, audiences would have done the thing that audiences do, why would he do that? But I think because he went and revisited his past, it was just a really great arc to see. It was such a drastic change. And as you said before, George R.R. Martin is really good at making you like people you hate. Daemon goes, bends the knee in such a solemn way. They connect as, husbuncle and wife, and rallies the army. And for me, that was just like goosebumps moment. That was my scene of the season. I loved it.
I'm not necessarily a big fan of the director for lore reasons that's in charge of that episode and then one of the earlier episodes, but hands down cinematography at its best. The lighting as like Daemon's standing there with the pillars of Harrenhal and the army to his side. The way he kneels down and like the light almost shines down on him is doing is like finally he's in the right, he's in the light. It's perfect. It is so beautifully shot, that scene. And then I just like how, if you're paying attention, you see Simon in the background, the old man that's been hanging out with Daemon this whole time, as he's like clapping like a dork in the background, just happy. They're like, they're together again. Just watching it.
Yeah. And I think he was happy because he was like, okay, now this army and this place won't be subject to 6 furious dragons, because Daemon's obviously aligned himself in the right place. So yeah, I really liked that season. I thought it was good. All right. Next award for our season celebrations goes to the most unlikely allies. Frank, who goes to the most unlikely allies for you this season?
Rhaenyra and Alicent. I mean, again, book-wise, those two don't talk again after they separate, split off ways. Well, they kind of don't talk again. Anyways, and so to see that they're both trying to avoid this war at all costs, and then even at the point where Alicent's like, fine, I'll just lose the war, but can I have one of my kids, Helena, who's actually like the only good one? And even willingly sacrificing Aegon, which, hey, Aegon's not there anymore, so what's that mean? I think is really important character development that just adds so much to the story. Even if you're a book reader, especially if you're a book reader, it makes it far, far better, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I think that secret alliance is definitely a really good undertone for the season in terms of House of the Dragon season 2, because you are seeing, as you said before, all of these sort of men warmongering, and then the ladies sort of meeting in secret, knowing how dangerous it is, still pushing forward what they feel is right. And even though both of them are claiming to vie for the same sort of position for the people that they care about, they still know what's best for the realm, and that is not to fight with each other. So yeah, I like that. That's really good. My unlikely allies for this season definitely goes to Aegon and Larys, because that is an alliance I did not see coming. That is a friendship that obviously is going to be beneficial for Larys, but I think also beneficial for Aegon. And I like the moment specifically where Aegon was told by Larys, your body's never going to be the same again. You're going to have to start using your mind. And I feel like that is something that Aegon really needed, because his transition went from, party boy sitting on the throne with all his boys Then at the end, he was burnt. He had no capacity to party any longer in more than one sense, if you know what I'm talking about. And all his party boys were gone either to the wall or, burnt by dragon fire. The last person he had left was Larys, and that sort of connection, even though I feel like there's an agenda there, I still feel like, as you said, there was that empathy, that sympathy there. And Aegon is also probably appreciative that he's not going through this all by himself. So that is my unlikely ally for the season 2.
Good choice. Yeah.
Thanks, man. I like that. All right, so let's talk about the biggest player. And I said to Frank before, this isn't the one who goes out and, gets all the girls or goes out partying so much. This is the one who makes the biggest move to further their position, either themselves or on the battlefield. What is your biggest player for the season 2, Frank?
Probably Adam. Yeah, he goes from a guy who's picking up clams to now the most loyal and highest ranking knight in Rhaenyra's army. I mean, the other ones are kids. So yeah, he goes from somebody who's just like, oh, look at that dragon who happens to be flying by, to like this guy's on top of the world now and he's amazing. So all of the Velaryon family definitely goes through a lot of changes. But Adam and Alan, I'm just a big Adam fan. I have the biggest changes, I think.
Yeah. Just while we're on that as well, we didn't touch on it, but can you talk to me about Sea Smoke was the only dragon that actually went out and sought Adam. That was different to any of the sort of, the dragon seedings or dragon claimings that we've seen before. Why did he do that? Is that something that's different inherently? Has that happened before?
No, I think it's happened before. I think we're kind of seeing it with Sheepstealer a little bit. But yeah, so the idea there is the fact that ideally Laenor is dead. In the book, he is dead, and in the show, that's like, okay, if he's looking around, then he's probably dead. And so he looks for something similar. And then Adam is just a good person who has that adventuring spirit, something that Sea Smoke wants as well. So it has been done in the past. I'm trying to remember exactly how. I think it was the same way pretty much. But yeah, I think it's just because, they have the same kind of bond. And, I think that's just what it is. Yeah.
Sorted out through the forests and things like that.
The key is that Sea Smoke's young too, like Vermithor and Silverwing, which is, they were husband and wife dragons, back in the day. They're old, like older. So they're like to hang out in the cave. They don't want to go out too much. They just want food. When Sea Smoke's still pretty young, and that's like Sheepstealer, which I think they did visually. They did a really good job making that one look wild. They're still young, so they're still out there fighting and hungry and want to do stuff.
Very cool. My biggest player award goes to Rhaenyra in general, just for allowing that breaking of tradition for the bastards to come and actually claim dragons. If she did not do that, then her position would have remained in the subordinate phase against Vhagar and Aemond against King's Landing, because as a result of her making that choice, she now has 7 dragons at her beck and call. And honestly, I don't know why she doesn't take those 7, go and defeat Vhagar, and then ride against King's Landing. That's a possibility that she could do right now. Obviously there'll be some political aspect to that as well, but she's in a very powerful position.
Just to throw in on that, you got to remember that she's raised by Viserys, who was raised by Jaehaerys, 2 peacetime kings, and so she looks at it as in so what she wants to do is attack Old Town and Lannisters, because she sees that if you do that, you take away the power from Red Keep, and then you can go in there and not kill anybody in Red Keep, ideally. So she's trying to think of the ways to. The minimum amount of damage is to take out the lords of the supporters and then go in without having to kill your own, because Kinslayer is a very bad title to have, where you killed your own family. So she's trying to avoid that title at all costs. And yeah, she's trying to do things like her dad and her grandfather would have done. Very much negotiating. If it was Daemon, oh my God, yeah, take Vhagar right out of the sky.
Yeah. I feel like that's a really good opposition to have in terms of, Aemond, who is very much like that, and then Rhaenyra, who is trying to be wise. And it reminded me, you saying that reminded me of a line that she spoke, how she said, I think it said, there was 80 years of peace. If I'm going to break it, I'm going to make sure that there's a reason for it, So she is that very wise, thinks through her choices. And yeah, that's probably the reason why a lot of people follow her, is because she is that measured sort of ruler, which is good. All right. Let's go to our toughest luck award. Which character had the toughest luck throughout this entire season?
Well, there's a couple of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to give it to Aemond, just because, he starts off, first off, he accidentally killed his cousin at the end of the last season. That sucks. But he starts off being the biggest nuclear bomb there is in the world. And because of and he has his own ambitions, and he gets everything he wants and still messes it up. And by the end, he's like trying to force his sister to get on her dragon, which she just does not drive. She doesn't ever get on Dreamfire. And he's like so back against the wall, struggling. He's never played from behind before, and now he's constantly playing from behind. He still has Vhagar, but Vhagar is barely listening to him. He sees now that Dragonstone has enough ammo really to take him out. So he went from like the most important military asset in the world to I'm outnumbered. I'll stay there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not great.
I really like that as well because, especially in that last episode, but even throughout the season, it's almost watching Aemond slowly lose control. And then in this last episode, you see him do what he always does when he loses control. He lashes out. He goes and he burns a town down. He forces or tries to force his sister to do something that she doesn't want to do. He is like lost. And that is not the mental capacity of a ruler that we're seeing. It's definitely someone who is very emotive and very emotional. And it's interesting to think as well, a lot of the people in the Green faction would look at Aemond and Vhagar and say, that's a really powerful asset that we have. But Aemond would probably be the only one that knows that, hey, yeah, Vhagar's powerful and, she's under my control, quote, but like how much really? Do you know what I mean? Like everybody's got that idea that she's everything and he knows specifically like maybe there's something here that everybody shouldn't put their faith in. So
what's cool is his dad's the last person to know that. The series, his dad was the last writer for Velaryon the Black Dread, again, the dragon that's bigger than Vhagar. And he wrote him once and was like, never again, because Velaryon was too much. I mean, of course, he's too much. He's bigger than, and knows that like we don't actually have control of them. Where this blood magic is generations old at this point. This isn't good. And so once he wrote him once, he's like, let him stay in the pit. Let him just retire. He's done, and stayed away from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like he also was, and that's the thing too. Like that whole idea, like we got to go peace first, because if we use our dragons, even we will get burned by them. That was something he passed down to his daughter.
Yeah. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Viserys was one of the few people to outlive their dragon, and he didn't take another. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's usually you only take one dragon. Yeah, usually it's only one dragon, but yeah.
Yeah, unless you're Daenerys, and then you have three. Yeah.
She only rode one of them, though. That's
true.
The key on that one.
Very true. All right, and the last category for our season celebrations is the award for the most character growth this season. Who's it going to, Frank? Who's grown the most? Who do we see?
It's got to be Daemon. Daemon is now fully on board with Team Black. Yeah.
Yep. Same.
It was a long walk, but he's finally where we need him to be. And again, that final shot with him kneeling down, that is a still for the entire season right there. I loved it.
I agree. Yeah. That's going in the episode art.
Yeah.
I definitely love it. No, I absolutely agree. I think that moment, it had the build up. Some might argue too long as well, but I feel like when we got there, it was rewarding, and now we can see united Team Black moving forward with everything that they have. It's going to be good to see. It's going to be great.
Yeah,
great season of television in 2 years' time for us, Frank.
We have a spinoff coming up, guys. Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. That's going to be very good. If you were like, oh, they kind of overdo it on the dragons, then you're fine. Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I'm pretty sure has no dragons.
It's grounded, isn't it? So it's more of a grounded story.
It's very grounded. It's about a knight and his squire basically roaming the lands, heading down to Dorne. It's going to be a lot of Dorne for the second part of that story. It's going to be really good. It's cool.
Very cool. Lastly, before I let you go, Frank, and it's been amazing chatting to you too about this. You're super knowledgeable about this sort of stuff, so it's been great. But what pieces of reading would you recommend for people who want something to sink their teeth into while they're waiting this 2 years for the next House of the Dragon to come out?
Honestly, it's all good, right? But I would say Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is a really good. It feels like The Hobbit in comparison to Lord of the Rings. So if you go to the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, you're gonna get a little bit of everything. There are Targaryens. You're gonna learn about. It's actually the ancestor, the great grandfather of Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, is the main character, Duncan the Tall. And so it's a very small book too. It's like 350 pages in comparison to like Dance of the Dragons, which is the latest book in the Game of Thrones. I think it was like 1,400 pages. It's a bite size in comparison, and you'll be prepped for the new show coming up. It's all good. Yeah, that's
very
good.
Nice. Yep, there you go. So there you have it, guys. From Frank at Geek Freaks, go and read Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, rather. It's been awesome, Frank. Thank you so much for joining me, as always. Guys, if you haven't already, go and follow and subscribe everything that you see from Geek Freaks. They're an amazing place in the online community to share your fandoms and to keep up to date on all the latest news as well. I don't see anybody that is as dedicated as Frank online, just to giving you the pop culture news that you need to see. I get all my pop culture news from Frank, so everybody should and definitely, you should definitely go and check out his stuff and follow him. And it's been an absolute pleasure, Frank. Thank you so much for joining me. It won't be the last time that I have you on, because it's been absolutely a joy, and I wish you all the best, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Thank you for having me. See you guys later.
See you.